Hello, everyone. I'm Leslie Van Sant, Chief Advancement Officer at WAMU. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the February Diane Rehm Book Club. Today, Diane hosts Amy Tan for a discussion of her 2024 bestseller, The Backyard Bird Chronicles. Tan is best known for novels like The Joy Luck Club, The Kitchen God's Wife, and The Bone Setter's Daughter. Rich works of fiction that explore mother-daughter relationships and the Chinese American experience. Her latest work is something completely different, a work of nonfiction compiled from journals kept over 6 years, documenting her relationship with the resident birds in her backyard through words and drawings. She takes the reader on a beautiful journey of observation and discovery, and we're so thrilled to welcome her here today. Before the conversation starts, a few reminders. If you'd like to ask a question, please do so using the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you'd like to use closed captioning, please click on the CC button, which is also found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Like everything we do at WAMU, this book club would not be possible without your support. If you enjoy the discussion today, please consider making a gift by visiting wamu.org/donate. Excuse me. And now here's Diane and Amy Tan.
And hello and welcome, Amy Tan. It's so great to see you.
So good to be here with you, Diane.
Amy, the last time I remember seeing you, you had a pouch around your neck, and in that pouch, you had your two tiny dogs. It was the dearest thing, and I wonder if you still have those two dogs.
I have those were my predecessors and my current dog. I still have a dog, but not as tiny as those two. One of those dogs that was on your show was 2 pounds, and the dog I have now is a whopping 4 pounds. So a much bigger dog. And I have to say, it was always risky to take those dogs on a radio show because sometimes they would fall asleep and start snoring. And then it sounded like I was making really rude gastrointestinal noises. So I'm glad that's not part of your memory, but that did.
Well, I must say, they were absolutely perfectly behaved on that program and just adorable. I gather you were able to take them on the airplane
Yes.
exactly that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now let's turn from dogs to birds. Tell me how this glorious project began.
First of all, I was not an expert on birds. I still don't consider myself an expert. In 2016, however, there was a spike in racism that was overt, and I had never experienced it quite as much. And it was depressing. I was in despair, and I couldn't work. I couldn't write this novel, and I didn't know what to do. And finally, I decided what I needed was a way to just escape. And I would go back into nature, which is a place that I'd always loved, but had not taken advantage of in many years. I was a former backpacker. And I decided at the same time, maybe I would do something I had dreamed of doing ever since I was 8 years old. And that is to try just drawing and taking art lessons. So I found somebody named John Muir Laws who did nature journaling workshops. And I started going into nature, and I was doing landscapes and, trees and learning how to do that. And suddenly I started drawing birds, observing birds. And I fell in love with birds. Um, I will say this, there is scientific evidence that when you go into nature and you are just paying attention and being there, it reduces your cortisol levels, it reduces the stress and anxiety, your heart rate goes down, your serotonin goes up. And so there is real evidence behind the fact that nature can do this kind of repair for you. I was addicted. I just had to be in nature all the time, to the detriment of my novel. I mean, I would sit there sometimes for 12 hours drawing birds and writing about what I
Wow.
was observing. That
And was your husband aware of all of this? What was
yes,
his reaction?
I have such an understanding husband. We've been together since 1970, so do the math, 55 years. And he was always very supportive, not saying, can you stop looking at birds and, do something else. He would also take me to places, to these classes because I can't drive. And he would take me on field trips so I could be with others and do the nature journaling workshops with other people. And it really he was very understanding when I started to buy mealworms, live mealworms, to feed the birds in my yard. And I got up to having to buy 20,000 at a time. And these mealworms are not worms like earthworms. They're actually larvae of beetles. And you have to keep them in the fridge so they don't continue their metamorphosis into
So,
beetles.
how large are they?
Oh, they're only this big. They're like an inch long, and they're moving. They're kind of, if you have them in your hand, they're moving. And you see them moving this mass. Well, we had to keep them in the fridge, and you can imagine 20,000 live mealworms in the fridge.
Wow.
And my husband didn't complain until we got to 20,000, and then he said, "Amy, we don't have any more room in the fridge for the dog food." So that was all he said. And we said, we'll save our marriage. We'll get another fridge and put it in the garage. And then we can put the animal food in the garage. So that's what we did. Yeah, he's a great guy. He's wonderful.
One of the first illustrations we see in this gorgeous book is a female hummingbird. And it has such incredible detail. And I wonder whether our producer is going, there it is. Tell us about this gorgeous hummingbird.
Well, first of all, you should know this hummingbird is a female Anna's hummingbird. And usually when you see photos or drawings of birds, you will see the male bird if they are in fact what's called dimorphic. They are differently plumaged according to their sex. And I thought it wasn't fair because these hummingbirds do all the work. They are the ones, they're not as brilliantly colored. You don't see very much red here. It has a little bit of red spot at the throat. But the females, they choose the mate. And the male is doing these flashy dances, the courtship and everything. He's gorgeous, he's talented, he's athletic. She chooses him, and then she takes him over to a bower, a tree bower, and they do the deed. 4 seconds later, it's done. He leaves. She has to make the nest, lay the eggs, take care of the young, teach them how to hunt, all of that. So this is a female.
Does he come back?
No, not at all. He's off, wooing some other females. So, so I decided to start drawing female birds. But I will say that the very first bird that caused me to really fall madly in love with birds was a male hummingbird.
Yes.
And I had heard, yeah,
that male hummingbird has so much more color.
Yes. And you see one here. This is there's some of the color here, but there's some that are just full-headed red, brilliant iridescent red. I had a little hand feeder, and I read this thing that you could have hummingbirds come to your hand and feed. And I thought, oh, this is probably a scam. That would never happen. But I thought, well, it only costs like $1. So I thought, I'll just try it. And I thought it might take me a couple of months before I even had them looking at the thing. But within a matter of a really, really short time, the hummingbird paid attention and saw it. And suddenly it went from the feeder to my hand. And there it was sitting on my hand, feeding. And I was looking down at it. And I couldn't help myself from just saying, "Oh my God, you're so beautiful." And you'd think the hummingbird would take off being scared because I've just talked to it. But instead, it looked up and then it just kept feeding. And it just stayed there for, I don't know, it seemed like hours, it seemed like seconds. I couldn't tell. And because it just stayed, this tiny, tiny creature whose little feet I could feel on the palm of my hand, I was absolutely besotted. I felt like Dr. Doolittle, I felt like St. Francis of Assisi, who are the patron saints of birds,
Exactly,
yeah, it was
exactly.
magical.
Well, one of the questions we were asked came from Pamela. She said, "What a wonderful book. What came first, the pictures or the words?"
What came first was actually intentional curiosity. It's a mindset that I was taught by the teacher of nature journaling, and that is that when you go into a place, you're very still and quiet, and you notice. You make this deliberate effort to just sit there and wonder and ask questions. So that's why the book is a lot about behavior of birds. I'm not saying this is a bird that's 5 inches long and weighs 0.3
Right.
ounces or anything like that.
Right.
I'm looking and saying, I don't know what this bird is, but it has now gone over to this feeder and it keeps coming back. And oh my God, it just looked up at me and it didn't fly away. It continues to feed. So those were the observations that I was making. And at the same time, as I was getting better at sketching, I would draw something very quickly to know I wanted to go back and represent some aspect of what I had just observed. Um, uh, and so there were two kinds of drawings in this book. One are these cartoon-like sketches that are what we call en plein air, done in live as it was happening. And then the other are these more detailed colored pencil portraits. And that was more meditation on the bird. So I just have to emphasize this whole notion of curiosity being the thing that drove this whole book. And that by asking the questions that have no answers, I continued to pay attention and see more and more and more.
You have a drawing of fledgling scrub jay tails. And I thought that was so marvelous because, no, that is the male hummingbird again, but there they are, these scrub jay tails. Tell me how and why you created this almost comical drawing.
Well, first, let me say that on the East Coast, you have what's called a blue jay, and these
Right.
are our California version. They're California scrub jays, and they are very, very smart. They're corvids, and these are fledglings, meaning they've just left the nest. Mom is still sort of feeding them, but tapering off. So now they have to learn to hunt, and they're hungry all the time. I had a seed feeder, and it does not allow these birds to get up on the feeder and really eat that easily. So this poor little scrub jay was trying to learn to launch itself from the rail onto the feeder and missing, sometimes falling off, sometimes grabbing on, and it was hilarious. I could see the whites of its eyes like hanging on, saying, how can I not fall? Um, so the one thing that I noticed about scrub jays, and which I think is related to their intelligence, is persistence. Uh, if they don't succeed the first time, they keep trying, and they will try many different ways until they do succeed. And it taught me something about intelligence and persistence and survival. And that is something that animals need, but also people also need. survival in the job, they need to be persistent. Survival in a relationship, for example. That kind of persistence was wonderful to see.
And I must say, you almost try to get inside the birds' heads as to what they're thinking about, what they're thinking as they're doing what they're doing. And you should describe your home and the vision through which you were watching these birds.
Well, my backyard is really a combination of things. One is an oak habitat, meaning I have all these oak trees and a lot of shade and plants underneath. I have a patio, and in back there are oak trees, but the patio has all these clunky feeders. Some of them I have made. There are also succulents on the roof. We have another flower area, but the action happens mostly on that patio where I'm watching and where the feeders are. It's every day, I'll see, say, 25 different birds and different species of birds, depending on the season. So that really determines the kind of birds that come. The oak titmice come because they have oak trees. The woodpeckers are because they have trees. And some of the other birds, the ground feeders, the sparrows, they're there because I have ground, but everybody does.
This has to take a great deal of work on your part with both the ground feeders, the tree feeders. You've got a home that squirrels cannot get into, and yet one managed to get in part way anyhow. How do you deal with the other creatures that want that food?
Oh God. I was driven crazy by squirrels in a humorous way. I would keep tabs like squirrels 1, Amy 0, squirrels 2, Amy 0. Tried all kinds of methods to keep the squirrels away from the feeders. I discovered that they hate hot pepper suet. And once I bought that and hot pepper seeds, sunflower seeds, they never came back. But the rats did. And that was a problem. I couldn't, give them poison because if I did, they'd eat that. And then a raptor would eat possibly eat the rat.
Of course.
An owl, a hawk, and then they would die. So I was having to clean up my yard thoroughly. But one day we had owls move in to the yard and we had soon no more rats. So I had a nice ecological balance as a result of a very natural remedy, an exterminator called the great horned owl.
Amy, tell me about your editor and what your book publishing company thought of this idea. You were in the midst of writing a novel.
Yes. Well, I have a wonderful editor. He's my friend, Dan Halpern, an amazing, legendary editor, the kind of person who knows you as a person, just like my first editor, Faith Sale. He asked me one day, how's that novel going? And I was, and he knew I'd been keeping a journal of my backyard birds. And he said, how about we publish the journal? And I said, oh, no, you have no idea. That is not publishable. That's a big mess. It's just come what may off the top of my head. These early sketches, it's smudged. It has wine stains on it. And he said, that's authentic. And that's what we want. And that's a great word, isn't it? Authentic.
Authentic.
And you can look in the mirror in the morning and you say, I'm a mess, and you can just then say, I'm authentic. Anyway, I thought the publishing house, they're not going to buy it. And they actually thought, well, we'll give it a shot. So suddenly I had a book, which relieved me from, turning in the novel right away. but I wondered what people would think of these very amateurish sketches, cartoons, and my observations. Um, right up front, I do say I'm not an expert on birds. There might be mistakes there in what I think I've observed, but it's really about being in the moment, being present. Um, if you people out there are birders, you will probably recognize the name David Sibley, who is probably the icon of bird guides. David
Yes.
Sibley is the one who agreed to write the foreword to this book. And so that ended up giving the book some, I guess, some credibility. Very kindly gave me that, lent his name to it.
Now, here's a question from Gail. She says, is there an optimal number of feeders that one should place in the yard? How many is too many?
I'm the wrong person to ask that question because I have probably too many. I have, I would say, an average of 7 feeders in 3 or 4 different areas. I have one in the patio, on the side veranda, by my office, and then out in the yard, a special feeding section for the band-tailed pigeons and mourning doves and quail. So no, I don't think you can have too many. What you need to think about is how far apart you might space, say, hummingbird feeders from other feeders.
Huh.
I was told you should have them far away, but none of the things that I read, by the way, actually held up to be true. That birds are much more adaptable, the rules that you will read in a book about what birds will not do. I had read that ground feeders will not come to cage feeders, and in fact, they do. That wren tits, a very reclusive bird, will never come out into your yard, and yet they do all day long. So you just have to see what works according to the population of birds in your yard. If you have hummingbird feeders too closely spaced together, you will probably have territorial disputes. So that
Now,
is,
how does that happen? What happens when the hummingbird feeders
yeah,
are too close? What happens?
the males will try to guard all of the feeders and they will engage in battles. So if you have one within eye distance of each other, they will continue to go back and forth, and any male that comes into that visual area territory will be chased, or they will engage in this battle. And it's very distressing for some people to watch if you have a very bullying male hummingbird. So I try to put these feeders out of sight, one here, one that's not within the view. It could be close, but so the hummingbirds cannot guard both of those feeders. I have about 10 hummingbird
I
feeders.
see.
Yeah.
The Chronicle starts with a journal entry about an experience with a hummingbird, and then you observe these birds in detail, learning how to draw them. What had your early experience been with drawing anything? And did you find it difficult to pick up details of these birds?
I read an interview that had been done with my father when I was very young. And in it, he said, it happened to be published in a book. I was part of a longitudinal study on early reading. And it said that even before the age of 4, he said she liked to draw pictures and tell stories about them. And so it happened at the same time. When you're young, drawing stories and imagining the story and telling the story occur at the same time. And that continues to be the case. So I love to draw before the age of 4. I know at the age of 8, I wanted to be an artist secretly, but I had already been told I was going to be a doctor. I took art classes the way all kids took them. You had that 1 hour period where it was a free for all. You could choose your crayons or your paints and just, make messes. I never really got lessons on how to draw, any techniques on how to draw until this class that I took when I was 64 years old. So I didn't find it difficult. I had a learning curve, but I think my inclinations as a fiction writer is to observe behavior, certainly, but to observe details. And so I learned something very, very important that applies to fiction as well, and that is that you have to imagine that you are feeling the bird, literally feeling the bird in its shape, and understanding that a bird is not completely round. A bird has anatomy, it has a skeletal structure under it, and that determines the curves that you will see on the bird. I had to imagine the life force of the bird to really try and make that bird one that in the moment, that was a living creature. And then I also had to imagine at times that I was the bird. And so, to get that life into the bird. That was all part of it, as well as learning these techniques, very basic techniques. I will say this, if you want to draw a bird, you can draw a bird. All you need to do is practice. If you want to play the piano, you can play.
You have to practice.
You have to practice. You have to learn some practical lessons and techniques.
But now, how would you say the two things are connected? Your writing and your fascination with birds. What did one give or take from the other?
I had curiosity always as a child and imagination, but this was a different kind of curiosity in a way, that I learned that what I had to do was be very still in order to be curious with birds, because birds will take off the minute that they see movement. They will take off. A lot of creatures in the wild will do that. And it's very difficult for us in an age of screen time, ADHD, and moving and having goals. And we're hiking, we need to get someplace by 20 minutes and back. To just simply stand still is very foreign to many of us. And that was what I had to do in order to look at the birds and observe them. But the idea of paying attention to details and becoming the beginner, to having this beginner's mind and stripping away assumptions and looking at things fresh all the time is really important to me as a novelist, as a writer, but also as somebody who's observing birds. If I put my assumptions, if I think that I know something about these birds already, I will stop observing. I will stop asking those questions. And in fact, the behavior I see one day may not be the behavior I see the next day, or the reasons for it that I thought were the case. The intentions of the bird are not the intentions I ascribe to it. So I have to practice that over and over again. Now, the other thing that I found in watching birds is that it helped for me to imagine I was the bird, because I needed to imagine the life the bird had to really accurately represent this living bird. And that it was, and I'll tell you that when you look at all the behaviors, whether it's being territorial or eating or hunting or courting or having babies or needing to find a place to rest, it is all for one reason, and it is survival. The bird must have these things within 24 to 48 hours, food, or it will die. And I was aware after a while that 75% of these birds don't make it to adulthood, don't make it to breeding age. And that goes for raptors. When you see a hawk taking a bird and you say, oh, you wanted the little bird to win. And it's always very, very sad to me to see something like that happen. But at the same time, I recognize the raptors also have a very hard life, and 70%
Sure.
of them don't make it. So that's something to think about. It caused me to deepen my sense of compassion for people in general. People I do not meet, I don't see, that live in a different world, in a different country, and they're facing war or, drought and famine and all kinds of things that I can't imagine. And I do have to imagine it, just as I want to imagine the life of the bird, the difficulties they go through. So
And
in effect, it's a practice in compassion to do these drawings.
so you can imagine, as you watch these birds so intently, day after day, you can imagine the kinds of lives they have to live to stay alive.
Yes, yeah. The more that I watch them, the more I'm aware. And seeing them through different seasons, seasons also that have different weather patterns. We're getting more and more of these, what are called atmospheric rivers, cyclone bomb. And so dramatic weather that affects how these birds can get their food. Because when it's raining really hard for days and days and days, the insects are drowned. They're not coming out of wherever they're staying to protect themselves from the rain, or the flowers have wilted and it's very hard for them to get food that way. So that's when I would see the birds flocking to the feeders, desperate to get food. And it made me aware of what can happen, for example, as our weather patterns change with global warming, the difficulties that wildlife will face.
And of course, there are times, even where you live in California, where you don't see birds for quite some time.
There were times when I wouldn't see them, and I would wonder what had happened. There are times when the birds leave. They migrate to California or warmer regions, and then they return in the spring to their northern homes. Um, so I wouldn't see them for different seasons, and there would be very quiet periods. The hummingbirds would leave, and I think, why have they left? And I think the very human thing to do, the very anthropomorphic human thing to do, is to say, they don't like me anymore. What happened? Did they find somebody they like more, who has better food?
Yeah.
Um,
How
I
could they
how could
possibly?
they, I brought them live mealworms. I have the best suet for them. But there are changes that happen that we don't know about. One thing that during the wildfires that we had in Northern California, um, it's not that the birds in my yard left, it's that more birds came to my yard, different birds I'd never seen before. And they came, but only to stop by to bathe themselves and to drink water. And then they would continue on. Um, you could see how different conditions would change where birds can live, and I saw this in real time. Um, so I did have something. I went away for 3 weeks on holiday, and when I came back, I didn't see any birds in the yard. Now I had my goddaughter's son was taking care of the birds, and I assumed that he was feeding them, and I thought, did he not feed the birds? The feeders were full, no birds were there. The next day, there were no birds, and I thought, what? I'm getting very, very worried now. I'm looking out. And the third day, I went out and I just started saying, birds, birds, where are you? What happened to you? And suddenly I heard this behind me, and I looked, and there was this very reclusive bird, a red tit, right behind me. And then suddenly the birds started coming over the fence.
Oh my
They were
goodness.
lined up on the fence and then flowing down, and they weren't just one species of birds, they were all the species of the birds. And they were coming down into the yard, and they were hopping all around me and in the feeder. It was so
All right.
magical.
Okay, but now how do you interpret this?
I don't know, because it wasn't that I was bringing them food. The food was already there.
Yeah.
They knew that, they've seen me every day. They know me. And they will come to the yard when I'm standing there. Even if I'm talking, if I'm very still, they will come to the yard. But I realized I had not gone into the yard. I had just been watching them from on the other side of the window, which is an
Yes.
8 by 10 foot high window door.
I see.
And that was all that separated us. They're only 10 feet away from me when I'm in the dining room, but I had to step out and be there.
For them to trust enough to
I
make their presence known.
Yeah, well, I think they trust me when I'm on the other side of the window because I can't get to them. But they, I don't know what it was.
That's really remarkable that once you walk out, then the birds descend.
I have noticed that when I go in the morning to the dining room and I start to do my exercises, they will start lining up on top of the fence and watch me. And I will be watching them. I will be facing them and doing my exercises. That is a routine that we have. And then later I will go out and do something.
Are they the same kinds of birds who are watching you?
Yes, yes. I have um, certain birds that come during the season. It's now the winter season. So I have the migrants. I have the golden crowned sparrows, which you don't get on the East Coast. I have some warblers. I have a lot of ground feeders, white-throated sparrows, song sparrows, fox sparrows. So these are birds that only come to me during the winter.
Tell me, if you would, about the squirrel who was determined to get into that bird feeder and what you did to create
Oh,
a situation, a kind of different feeder.
that was actually a scrub jay. The
A
scrub jay,
scrub
yeah,
jay.
the scrub jay, the squirrels. Yeah, I got rid of them. I tried many different things, but it was really, I tried the normal things people would use, baffles that they couldn't climb the poles, greasing the pole, whatever. But it was the scrub jay that was the most difficult one to keep out of a particular feeder. I had built a feeder to keep them out, just wire mesh panels that little birds could get into and scrub jays could not. The scrub jay would stick its bill in and drag the little feeder bowl close to the edge and then feed from it and eat up all the food. And then I would put the feeders, the little bowls of food onto silicone pads. And the next morning, I saw that the silicone pad had been shredded into confetti on the floor. Then I wrapped twigs around the outside of the cage so that the scrub jay could not stick its head in. And the next morning I saw that all the twigs had been pulled out of the feeder. Then I got heavier sticks and put that around. And the next day I saw that it sawn through those sticks and they were on the
They are so smart.
And then I put bricks around the little bowls that were in the feeder so they couldn't possibly move the feeder closer. And the next day I saw that the scrub jay had put its entire head inside the cage, which was so dangerous for it to do. This 1.25 inch square opening, it had put its head entirely in there, which meant it was hard for it to back its head out. How did its brain work in saying, yeah, that risk in my being decapitated is worth it, worth getting, the suet.
Good.
And so that, to me, again, it made me laugh when I saw it. Every day I saw this, I would laugh. It was so remarkable that they would figure things out, all these skills that it had at its disposal to get rid of these things, to figure out what it needed to do.
Amy, I don't know where you are in your home in relation to your garden. And I'm also wondering if you have a laptop. Someone has asked whether you could show us your garden.
Oh, I'm in a completely different area of my house, and it would be a little difficult for me to go out and go up and outside. And I also
I
have,
understand.
yeah, it would
I
be. I
understand.
do have, let me see. I do have a feeder in my, this is not the place where I do most of my watching, but let me see if you can, there is a window.
I
I
see it.
don't know if you can see, there are some feeders. There's oak tree,
Yes, I
and
do.
there were some birds. Oh, they're on the ground and they are there. But yeah,
And they trust you enough to be there on the ground. It's really remarkable, I'm sure, for you to be in the midst of all of this activity and commotion and battling at times to watch this
it's
day by
the
day.
drama, constant drama
Yeah.
I'm watching. It's entertainment. It's as interesting as any movie that you'd see. And that's why I'm just so addicted to just staring out there and watching what they're doing. And often they will do something new that I've never seen before. So it's endless. It's never repetition. Um, I
Now,
had I sometimes have magical things happen with these birds. So, for example, on very special occasions, birds will show up. It was my birthday last week, and I didn't think about this until later that I didn't recognize it was my birthday. Suddenly had a new bird in the yard I'd never seen before. Beautiful gray, all gray bird. And it was actually a variant of a bird called a dark-eyed junco. And the dark-eyed juncos that we have here have dark heads and a chestnut or a sort of a brownish back and pinkish sides and brown tails and dark tails. This bird was completely gray with a white underside, and it was a junco, but so different. And it's called the slate colored junco. And I was so excited, and I'm telling everybody. Later on, I realized it's my birthday.
birthday.
I had a birthday present from the universe. On Thanksgiving, we always have owls come. On certain days, certain significant days, we'll have special birds come. And you just have to wonder, is it coincidence or is it actually something that is been drawn for a particular reason on that day? So that is part of the magic of seeing these birds.
Now, you were in the middle of writing your novel, you said, when all this began. When you then went back to your novel, did it change the way you thought about what you were going to write and how you were going to write it?
I think that what made me much more conscious during the time that I was looking at the birds and writing about that, I always have the novel in my head every single day. And so everything that happens, whether I'm, socially seeing friends or reading something, whatever, it always feeds into my consciousness of the novel. And so there was a lot more having to do with survival, and also what continues, the continuance over generations. For example, I'm very curious about epigenetics. I'm very curious about, what gets passed on from generation to generation. And so you see in birds, this cycle of what gets passed on happening much more quickly because their lifespans are shorter. You'll see what gets taught to a crow and what its next generation knows about my yard, for example. Um, my yard is no longer very friendly to crows. And
Why not?
the crows were messing up the feeders and keeping all the little birds away from the feeders. And I decided I needed to not have them come and train their babies how to raid the feeders anymore. So I read that crows will actually hold funerals, that they recognize comrades who've died and they will hold funerals, and they will recognize people who might have been mean to them. So I decided what I need to do is get a dead crow. And so I did. I went to this Wild Birds Unlimited and I bought a dead crow, which cost $14.99. It's plastic, but it has black chicken feathers on it. And I mussed it up, and I tied a string around it, and I hung it upside down, and I was like pounding it, and I put it out there. And pretty soon I had crows flying from all different directions, screaming, and I'm thinking they recognize this crow. Really? It's a $14.99 crow from a store. But they're screaming, going by, looking at it. Squawky's been murdered. And they held this funeral, yelling and screaming in the trees. And then they didn't come back. Or they would stay in the tree, but they wouldn't come to the yard, except every now and then there would be a young juvenile crow. And you can tell the ones that are young, and it would land on
He
the
hadn't
fence.
gotten the message.
Yeah,
yet.
it would land on the fence post, and it would look in the yard as if thinking,
Wow.
this is where the murder happened. It would be looking around and would not come into the yard. And I had that, the young ones are the ones, they would come and look in the yard like that and take off. So that made me think about the ways that messages get passed on, which has something to do with what is going on in my next novel.
And when is that next novel?
Oh, not even my editor knows that. I would not be able to say that, but yeah, I'm working on it and soon. So it's been, I already have it started. It is well on its way. But what happens in those intervening years are all the things that went into evolving who I am. So the novel, that was started a number of years ago, has changed in its focus because of what I've experienced, because of some issues that I think are very serious in my life and in our world. And by necessity, I can only write a novel that has the questions I need to think about during the entire time that I'm writing it. It is very interactive with my life. Even if it's a novel that took place in the past, the questions are very important.
So interesting, because you began with the birds because you were looking for a way to get away from negative thoughts and what was happening in the world, and yet here you are.
Yes.
Right back into it.
Well, but now I have the strength to deal with this. And because when I go into nature, I feel immediately calmed. I can focus myself. I'm not depressed. I'm not in despair. I can do things. When bad things happen, I can still be active. I can do something immediately that is positive and not be mired into helplessness, which is where I was back in 2016. And it doesn't matter what the reasons are. Those of us who've gone through these periods, it can be situational, as it was in 2016, or it can be something that is built in, a kind of depression that one is vulnerable to. But to have this ability to stand on something and get a firm grip again on your life and separate yourself from the mess is really important. So now I can do that with my novel. But it turns out that the mess, the things that cause me to be in despair are the very things that are feeding into this novel. It is the thing that I need to address, the difficulties. I remind myself that all of my novels come out of a place of discomfort, of a need to know, that I don't know exactly how I feel about it completely. The questions of morality are very complex, and they have a million different contexts that need to be taken into consideration. And
And would you say that the watching the birds and their behavior has somehow affected the way you're thinking about the world?
I am deepened in the sense of always being aware of my emotions and where I am at the time, the situation. Watching these birds, it became a very emotional experience of asking questions about my own morality. I was constantly faced with questions of mortality and the fact that here is a bird that will possibly die if this doesn't happen. These little fledglings have about 2 weeks to figure out how to feed themselves or they will die. And they need to learn how to protect themselves from predators or they will die. So questions of morality, awareness of morality and mortality were heightened. And I will take that with me as I go into this next novel. They are the things that I've always thought about, but now I feel like I've got more awareness in that area as a result.
And strength
Yeah.
as well. There is a paragraph I'd be happy for you to read. It's toward the end of the book, I think, on page 203, is it?
I think you said 208.
208.
Yes.
Good. If you would, please set that up for us.
One of my closest friends was a man named Asa DiMatteo, who I met in 1970. And so that was a long time ago. And he was very influential in my life in getting me into linguistics and being more brave and being more outrageous and at times taking risks. He was outrageous. He was somebody who would dress in drag, and one time he dressed in drag as me at a party. So he was very loud and always calling for attention. And he died suddenly in 2021 of a heart attack. And I could not believe that this very vivid person was no longer in my life. A few days after, I saw a bird, a robin, appear. Now, robins are very common birds, but not in my yard. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'm seeing this new bird. And then shortly after, within minutes, I saw a purple finch. And I thought, this is really unusual. I never have purple finches in my yard. And then again, within a matter of minutes, I saw a chipmunk. Now we have squirrels. We do not have chipmunks. I have never seen a chipmunk. And this chipmunk was just sitting there, and a California towhee went over and just looked at the chipmunk, and the chipmunk is just looking at it.
Yeah.
And then it retreated. And I thought to myself, finally, I thought, no, is this something like Asa coming back as a way to say goodbye? He was a doctor. He was an atheist. He didn't believe in this kind of stuff. But then I could hear Asa saying, how many times do I have to get into animal drag before you believe it's me? So I'm going to read you something about what I said. All these sightings occurred within the same hour and should have remained simply a pleasant coincidence. However, I've long hoped in a wishful way that people I've loved and lost might return in some form to provide a better farewell. If the person came back as a bird, it would have to be strikingly different to enable me to distinguish it from the usual avian crowd. And now here I had had two unusual birds and a bonus chipmunk. The logical part of me reasons that there is no special meaning in this kind of randomness coinciding with grief and hope. And as I said, Asa was an atheist who believed in science. He would have said there's no such notions. Those were nonsense. Many mutual friends would agree that Asa was larger than life, outrageous, dramatic, someone who made grand entrances, calling out in his barking voice that he had arrived, that we had to pay attention to him. If three critters are indeed a visitation, then this was overkill. And that too was Asa, over the top, excessive in any way. And I can hear him yelling in exaggerated exasperation. How many times do I have to get into animal drag for you to acknowledge it's really me? So that was Asa. Yeah.
You know, Amy, I have my own experience with exactly that kind of feeling. I've seen a hummingbird twice in my life. Once with my late husband at our farm, where we have big picture windows, and the hummingbird came very close. And then the day after he died of Parkinson's, up on the 14th floor of my condo, a hummingbird came
wow.
onto the balcony.
Wow.
And I called my son immediately, and I said,
Wow.
I just saw a hummingbird. And he said, Dad still lives. So, I mean, what do we make of these things, these creatures all around us? So beautiful, so magnificent, so erudite in how they conduct their lives. And yet, too often, we simply pass them by. And
Yes.
you have created such an impetus for people to take off their eyes from their cell phones and look around and see those beautiful, beautiful birds. Not the same ones you have in California, but in other parts of the world.
It takes only one bird to change your life.
That's really quite a statement, and I do agree with you. Amy Tan, what a joy to talk with you again. And
Thank you.
I will so look forward to your next novel whenever you finish
Thank you.
it. In the meantime, continue your bird watching, continue your drawing, and enjoy every single minute.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's all for today. I want to thank all the people at WAMU who make these book clubs possible. The next book club meeting will be on Wednesday, March 26th. Scott Turow joins me for a discussion of his latest work, Presumed Guilty, the third book in his series about Rusty Savage that began with Presumed Innocent. I certainly hope to see you all again next month. Thanks for being with us. I'm Diane Rehm.